How many times have you felt lost, directionless, as if everything around you was falling apart? Ruth went through moments like that. She faced the pain of loss, loneliness, and uncertainty. But, in the midst of so much adversity, she found an unwavering strength that changed the course of her life. This isn't just the story of one woman, it's the story of all of us who have sought hope in times of despair. Get ready to embark on a journey of faith, courage, and transformation. Ruth's destiny could be the key to changing your life. Watch now and discover how hope can arise in the most unexpected places. Imagine, for a moment, Ruth's situation. She was a young Moabite woman, someone who had lived in a land far from Israel, surrounded by different customs and cultures. She had married an Israelite man, but soon after the wedding, life became harsh and relentless. Her husband passed away, and with him, the hopes of a peaceful future in the land she once knew. Naomi, her mother-in-law, had also suffered great losses. Her husband, Elimelech, and her sons, who were the husbands of Ruth and her other daughter-in-law, Orpah. Now, Naomi stood on the edge of an emotional abyss, a woman who had lost everything. The pain of widowhood, left alone in a foreign country with her two daughters-in-law, was profound. But even with sorrow weighing on her heart, Naomi decided to take a step of faith. She had heard that the famine that had plagued the land of Moab had ended, and within her, there was a burning desire to return to her homeland, Bethlehem in Judea, where perhaps, just perhaps, she might still find some hope for her life. She then turned to her daughters-in-law and, with a voice laden with wisdom and weariness, urged them to follow their own paths. Go back to your land, to your parents' homes. Marry again, find new families, and rebuild your lives, Naomi said, knowing that as widows, they were marked by pain and loss, with few options for a fresh start. She released them to leave, understanding their sorrow and knowing their lives could take a different course without her. Orpah, with a heavy heart, listened to these words and, with tears in her eyes, made the decision to return home. She bid farewell with one last warm embrace and went on her way, seeking a new future in her homeland. But Ruth, on the other hand, was far from following the same path. As Ruth heard Naomi's words, she knew that her life had changed forever from the moment she joined Elimelech and Naomi's family. She felt a deep connection, an immense loyalty, not just because of her husband's death but also because of the love that had grown in her heart for Naomi. She did not want to leave her alone in such a difficult moment. The bond between them was stronger than any blood tie. With tear-filled eyes, Ruth looked into Naomi's and spoke words that would never be forgotten. Do not urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. These words from Ruth were more than just a simple promise, they were a declaration of faith, loyalty, and courage. She was willing to follow Naomi to an unknown future, not knowing what awaited her. She knew she was leaving behind everything she had ever known. She was surrendering herself completely to the unknown. It was a step of trust, not only in Naomi but also in God, because in embracing the God of Israel, Ruth was accepting something far greater than she could comprehend at that moment. Ruth's choice, driven by faithfulness and bravery, is a reflection of how true love can transform lives. She was not just following a person, in a way, she was also following God's will. Ruth understood that this decision carried great significance, and her choice was about to lead her on a journey that would not only change her life but the lives of everyone around her. Ruth's loyalty was not just an act of kindness or gratitude, it was a demonstration of genuine faith. By choosing to stay by Naomi's side, Ruth was placing her trust in something greater than the difficult circumstances she faced. She chose to follow Naomi, and in doing so, she chose faith in God, who, unbeknownst to her, would lead her to a glorious and hope-filled destiny. This decision, made with courage and faith, made all the difference. Ruth did not know what awaited her, but her heart was steadfast in her choice. And as we will see, this act of faithfulness would be rewarded in ways no one could have foreseen. Ruth's loyalty, so pure and true, would open doors to a future that once seemed distant and improbable. Ruth did not know it yet, but she was about to become an eternal example of faith, courage, and loyalty. Her choice would not only change her life but also the course of history for an entire people. Don't forget to check if you're subscribed to the channel so you won't miss more videos like this. The journey back to Bethlehem was not easy. Naomi and Ruth, now alone, left Moab in a time of total uncertainty. What could they expect upon returning to a city that Naomi had left many years before, marked by tragedy and loss? Ruth, a young woman, a widow, and a foreigner, walked beside her mother-in-law with faith but without knowing exactly what the future held for her. They were about to face the unknown, without resources, without protection, and without guarantees. The only things they had were hope and the certainty that God was with them, even when circumstances seemed to say otherwise. As they entered Bethlehem, the people of the city stirred. Those who lived there began to whisper, to ask, "Is it her? Naomi?" Many people remembered Naomi, who had left years before, full of life and with her family, and now she was returning with a face marked by suffering and pain. It was the same Naomi, but she was no longer the same woman. She had lost her husband and her sons, and the light in her eyes seemed to have dimmed. Time and tragedy had left deep scars. Seeing the city so agitated, Naomi, with a heart full of bitterness, spoke to those who recognized her. "Do not call me Naomi, which means pleasant. Call me Mara, which means bitter, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty." Her words reflected the pain she felt in her heart, the sense that God had abandoned her. She saw herself as someone who had lost everything, with no prospect of a better future. But amid this bitterness, there was still something in Naomi that remained. Faith, though small, had not been completely extinguished. She knew there was a sovereign God who could somehow turn the page of her story. The problem was that she didn't know how or when that would happen. She felt like someone lost, wandering in the desert, without direction, with a foggy future ahead. But returning to Bethlehem, the home of her ancestors, represented a chance to start over. Though the past was painful, who knew what the future might hold? And it was at this moment that Ruth, the young Moabite, began taking her first steps toward her destiny. Though she didn't know what the future would bring, she committed to following her mother-in-law to the end, not just physically, but with an open heart for whatever God might do in her life. Ruth had no family, no respected name in the city. She was not from Bethlehem and, therefore, had no status or support. But her loyalty to Naomi, her faith, and her character began to shine, even in the shadows of sorrow and uncertainty. Ruth, with her pure heart and deep love, was about to be used by God in a way she never imagined. What seemed like a return filled with pain and desolation was slowly beginning to take on a different form. Returning to Bethlehem was not the end of Naomi and Ruth's story, but rather the beginning of a journey of transformation, redemption, and hope. Ruth, the foreigner, unknowingly, was about to become part of something much greater than she could ever imagine. Thus, while the city of Bethlehem murmured about Naomi's return, Ruth was silently taking her first steps toward something that would forever change not only her life but also the history of Israel and even the future of humanity. She did not know it yet, but she was about to enter the lineage of King David and, later, the lineage of Jesus Christ. And it all started there, at the moment of their return to Bethlehem, where their journey of suffering, faith, and hope would begin to blossom into something glorious. Ruth, after returning to Bethlehem with her mother-in-law Naomi, found herself in a desperate situation. Without a husband, without children, and with few means of support, life seemed like a constant struggle. But in that moment of scarcity, Ruth knew she had to do something to survive. According to the law of Israel, the poor and widows had the right to gather what fell from the fields during the harvest. So, determined to help Naomi and herself, Ruth decided to go to the wheat fields to collect the leftover grains left behind by the workers. It was a difficult and arduous task, but what else could she do? She arrived at the field and began to work, unaware of what awaited her. With calloused hands, Ruth bent down to pick up the grains that fell to the ground, battling the heat of the sun and exhaustion. She had no idea that this simple act of searching for food would change her life forever. While she was there, unaware that she was in the field of Boaz, a wealthy and respected man, Boaz watched from a distance. As the owner of the land, he noticed a young woman diligently collecting the grains. Boaz already knew Naomi's story, and upon seeing Ruth there, he recognized her. He was not only impressed by Ruth's effort but also by her humble and determined attitude. Without hesitation, Boaz approached her. He, a man of respect, was not only wealthy but also known for his generosity and fairness. When he spoke to Ruth, he did not treat her coldly or with suspicion, as was often the case with foreigners. Instead, Boaz greeted her with a kind and welcoming tone, telling her that she was welcome there and should feel free to gather the grains. Upon hearing his kind words, Ruth was surprised. She had not expected such kindness, especially from such an important man. At first, she was bewildered and even asked why he was treating her with such kindness since she was a foreigner. Boaz then explained that he knew of her loyalty to her mother-in-law Naomi and how she had left her land and her people to follow Naomi. He knew she had a noble character and that her actions in helping her elderly mother-in-law were something that pleased God. Ruth, touched by his words, felt a peace she had not known for a long time. She was in a vulnerable situation, but now she had found someone who respected her, who saw her not as a mere stranger but as someone worthy of help and protection. Boaz's kindness at that moment was a reflection of something much greater, something Ruth could not yet see but was beginning to understand: God's favor in her life. God's favor began to reveal itself in an impressive way. Boaz, moved by Ruth's actions, not only welcomed her into his field but also went beyond what was expected. He instructed his workers not only to allow Ruth to gather the leftover grain but to leave more than usual. He ordered his servants to intentionally drop extra grain around her so that she would have an abundant harvest. This was not a common practice, but Boaz wanted to ensure that Ruth had enough to survive and that Naomi would be well fed. But Boaz didn't stop there. He instructed his workers not to bother her or reprimand her for gathering in the fields, something that could have been seen as inconvenient by some. He treated her with the same dignity he would treat any other important person. More than that, Boaz also made sure she was protected, giving her the freedom to keep collecting without fear of the other workers. Ruth, who had initially thought she would be struggling to get some food, now saw a miracle before her eyes. She didn't understand how all of this was happening, but deep down, she felt that God was working in her life. What had started as a search for simple survival was now turning into an experience of grace and divine provision. Each grain she collected seemed to remind her that God had never abandoned her, even when she thought she was alone. At the end of the day, Ruth returned home with an impressive amount of grain. She could hardly carry it all. When Naomi saw her arriving, she was shocked by the abundance Ruth had brought. Curiosity took over Naomi, and she asked where Ruth had found such generosity. Ruth then revealed the name of Boaz, the man who had treated her with such kindness. Naomi, surprised and excited, began to realize what was happening. She knew that there was a plan unfolding in God. Boaz's favor was not just a coincidence but a sign that God was at work. Something big was about to happen in Ruth's life, something she hadn't imagined, but which would change her destiny forever. This day of harvest was not just a material victory for Ruth but also the beginning of a new journey, where God's goodness was manifesting in surprising ways. Ruth's life, which had seemed hopeless, was now being touched by an invisible hand, guiding her steps toward something glorious. And it all began with a simple act of faith, courage, and loyalty. After Naomi and Ruth's return to Bethlehem, the two found themselves in a very difficult situation. Naomi, with the wisdom gained through the years and the adversities she had faced, knew that the only way to secure a safe future for both Ruth and herself was for Ruth to marry again, but with a man capable of redeeming the inheritance of Elimelech, Naomi's deceased husband. In Israelite culture, there was the practice of the kinsman redeemer, a man from the family who had the responsibility to marry the widow of a relative in order to preserve the family name and property. Naomi knew that in Bethlehem, there was a very respected, wealthy, and generous man who could be that kinsman redeemer, Boaz. With her faith in God and trust in his guidance, Naomi decided that Ruth should approach Boaz. Not just in any way, but in an audacious and meaningful manner. Naomi instructed Ruth to prepare herself well, taking a bath, putting on perfume, and wearing her best clothes. It was a way of showing Boaz that she was ready for a new chapter in her life. With a look full of faith and hope, Naomi said to Ruth, "Go to Boaz while he is resting after working in the fields. Wait until he lies down, then go and uncover his feet and lie down there. He will tell you what to do." It was a bold step, full of significance. By doing this, Ruth would be symbolically asking Boaz to take the role of kinsman redeemer, ensuring protection, provision, and the continuation of Elimelech's lineage. It was an act of humility and courage, but also of complete trust in God and divine providence. Naomi, with her unwavering faith, believed that this action could change the fate of both of them. That night, when the field was quiet and the work had ceased, Ruth followed Naomi's instructions. With her heart racing and thoughts racing through her mind, she went to the place where Boaz was resting. He was lying near the barley, tired after a long day of work, unaware that his life was about to change. Ruth approached him cautiously, silently, and lay down at Boaz's feet. The night was quiet, and the atmosphere was one of expectation. Ruth knew she was making an important decision, one that could change her life forever. She, a Moabite woman, a foreigner, was asking Boaz to take on a commitment usually reserved for Israelite women. But Ruth, with courage, believed this was the right moment. She didn't know how he would react, but she trusted that God would guide her. When Boaz wakes up and realizes someone is at his feet, he is surprised. "Who are you?" he asks. With a firm voice but full of humility, Ruth responds, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread the corner of your cloak over me, for you are my kinsman redeemer." This bold and profound request reveals Ruth's faith in God and her courage to seek a future of hope, despite the difficulties she had faced up until that point. Ruth didn't know what Boaz would think, but her request wasn't just about marriage, it was a request for redemption, for restoration. She was seeking protection, but also the opportunity to live a new life, alongside someone who could be an anchor of hope and stability. Boaz, upon hearing Ruth's words, is deeply moved. He is surprised, but his response is full of respect and honor. Boaz was a man of character who valued the dignity of people and, especially, the importance of family. He was aware that this request was not something simple, but something that involved the continuity of a lineage and the preservation of an entire family's inheritance. "Ruth," he says, "what you ask of me is great. I am grateful for your courage and loyalty. I will fulfill the role of a redeemer, but there is a closer relative who has the right to be the first to do this. I will do everything according to the law and resolve this matter so that you and Naomi have the secure future you both deserve." Boaz was determined to act with integrity. He knew that for Ruth's plan to come to fruition, he would first need to consult the closest relative, the one who had the legal right to be the redeemer. Even so, Boaz's response reflects his kindness and respect. He assured Ruth that he would do whatever was necessary, promising her that she would not be alone and that her future would be in good hands. With the decision made, Boaz wastes no time. He goes to the city gate, a place where legal decisions were made, to settle this matter once and for all. He gathers the elders and the closest relative to discuss the situation. This relative, upon hearing Boaz's proposal, is initially willing to accept the purchase of Elimelech's land and continue Naomi's inheritance. But when he finds out that this includes marrying Ruth, he withdraws. The relative, who did not want to take on more family responsibilities, becomes reluctant. He fears the consequences of this marriage, fearing it could affect his own inheritance. Realizing that his reluctance would be detrimental to Ruth, Boaz takes on the role of redeemer. With great confidence and integrity, he announces his decision and takes the legal steps to ensure Ruth's future. This moment reveals Boaz's courage and integrity. He was not intimidated, even in the face of a legal obstacle. Boaz assumes his responsibility as Ruth's redeemer, and by doing so, he ensures that Ruth will have not only a new life but also the chance to prosper and integrate into the lineage of Israel. The story of Ruth and Boaz is not just about the meeting of two hearts, but about the restoration of an entire life, about divine intervention in times of darkness. After the entire process that brought Ruth and Boaz together, the decision is finally made. They marry. But this marriage is not ordinary. It is not just a simple act of love between two people, although that is also an important part. What is happening here is much deeper. It is an act of redemption. By taking Ruth as his wife, Boaz is fulfilling a crucial role in the history of his family and the lineage of Israel. Why is this so important? To understand, one must go back a little further. Ruth, a Moabite, had lost her husband and was alone, without the right to inheritance, without status in her society. She was in a place where, in the eyes of the world, there seemed to be little to do. But by choosing to follow Naomi, her mother-in-law, with courage and loyalty, she was already taking the first steps toward her transformation. Boaz, in turn, is the man whom God chose to restore all that was lost. He was a close relative of Naomi, and, according to the laws of the time, had the right to marry the widow of a deceased relative in order to keep the family line alive. But this was not just a matter of legal obligation, it was an act of generosity, compassion, and faith. He chose to be Ruth's redeemer, ensuring that she not only had a new life but also a prosperous and secure future. Their marriage, then, is not just a physical union but a symbol of restoration. Ruth, who once felt like a stranger in Israel, now becomes part of a family blessed by God. She, a woman from a distant land, is welcomed and restored. God, in the chaos of loss and pain, brought an unexpected and perfect solution. He used Boaz to restore not only Ruth's life but to restore the lineage of a family that would be part of a much greater plan. This marriage, then, is a demonstration of God's power to transform lives, perform miracles, and restore what seemed lost. Ruth, a woman without hope, now had a new beginning, a new identity. She was now among the people of God, with a bright future ahead, and, more importantly, she was at the center of God's plan for Israel. When Ruth and Boaz got married, many might not have fully understood the significance of what was happening. However, what seemed like a simple union of two hearts was far more meaningful than anyone could imagine. Ruth, a foreign woman who was once a grieving widow in a distant land, would now become part of a story that would change the course of all of Israel's history. Ruth and Boaz had a son, Obed. And although the name might seem simple, he was about to become part of a magnificent lineage. Obed grew up and had a son named Jesse, who, in turn, had a son named David, who would later become the king of Israel, one of the greatest kings in history, known for his courage, faith, and leadership. And here lies the true greatness of Ruth's destiny. When she chose to follow Naomi, she didn't know she was positioning herself to be part of the lineage of a future king. When she decided to marry Boaz, she had no idea that her descendants would bring forth the man after God's own heart, David. But by allowing herself to be guided by God in her journey of faith, Ruth became part of a divine plan far greater than she could ever comprehend. Ruth's story is, in fact, a powerful lesson about how God can use even the most difficult moments to bring incredible blessings. Her faithfulness, courage, and decision to follow God transformed her life. She wasn't just restored, she was positioned to be part of something magnificent. Her life impacted not only her generation but all the generations that would follow her. She, a woman without roots, without hope, without a future, became part of the story that would lead to the birth of Jesus Christ, the King of Kings. What seemed like a story of pain and suffering was, in fact, a story of redemption. Through Ruth, God brought powerful restoration, not only for her but for all the people of Israel. This story of Ruth is not just about her. It serves as a reminder that even when we don't understand, God is always working to give us a future. He used Ruth, an ordinary woman, to accomplish something extraordinary. Ruth didn't just change her own life, her faith and courage left a legacy that would impact generations, even unto the arrival of the Savior of the world. In His wisdom, God even used difficulties to shape a glorious destiny for Ruth. And through her, He shows us that, even in moments of pain and loss, there is always a chance for redemption, transformation, and a future full of hope.